And so there's going to be no privately owned cars.
Stop the cap.
I don't think so. I don't think that's reasonable. He goes on to say, there'll be no more highways. We'll turn the highways into parks. It's like, well, there's still going to be 10 million people living there. And even if it's self-driving cars, they got to drive on something, right? Like, it's just total fantasy. The World Economic Forum is an international body that has a big vision for the future of the globe. These unelected elites have decided what is best for us and our future and are not shy about showing their hands if you're paying enough attention. The clearest sign is from a 2016 video where they said, in the near future, you will own nothing and be happy. That's a quote. Klaus Schwab seems to still be on that wavelength in a recent conference. Let's look at what he had to say.
20th. I hope I will have the pleasure still to be invited for the meeting. When we meet for the 20th Governance Summit, you will use an app like Uber, but not anymore to call some driver, but automatically guided car, a self-driven car, will come to your hotel or wherever you are and will bring you to the airport. No, Los Angeles is one of the cities with the heaviest traffic. Who told me in 2030, Los Angeles will be private car driven free.
In 2030, Los Angeles, that has like 10 million people in it, will no longer have any privately owned cars.
Stop the cap.
All of the people who have spent thousands of dollars and saved their money and bought the car of their dreams, they're just going to hand it over to the government or Klaus Schwab or the World Economic Forum. I'm not exactly sure what the plan of implementation is here. I think, when they they talk like every once in a while conspiratorial about taking away everybody's guns, and everyone's like, don't try that in Texas. I think the same way about like Miami and Los Angeles with people's cars. People care about their cars there. And so there's going to be no privately owned cars.
Stop the cap.
I don't think so. I don't think that's reasonable. He goes on to say, there'll be no more highways. We'll turn the highways into parks. It's like, well, there's still going to be 10 million people living there. And even if it's self-driving cars, they got to drive on something, right? Like, it's just total fantasy, but they believe it. And this isn't some conspiracy. The World Economic Forum has an initiative called the Great Reset. And they're targeting a lot of those initiatives in 2030 to completely remake not just the way we experience the world in the West and not just the way society functions, but an attempt to remake our desires and the very fiber of who we are at an ontological level. And a big part of that is you will own nothing. You won't own your house. You won't own your cars. You won't really own your money. You won't own any land. You will own nothing and you'll be happy. And I want to suggest that those two things are a paradox, that we were created to own. It's actually in the fiber of our being. And through a Christian worldview, we believe in something called the Imago Dei. We see at the very beginning of the creation narrative that God created the whole world. And then specific to humans, he said, let's make man in our image. We were created in the image of God, male and female. He created them in his image. He created them. And right after he creates us, he gives us the creative mandate. This is in Genesis 1:28 through 30. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. God also said, look, I've given you. This is ownership. Every seed-bearing plant on the surface of the entire earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed, this will be food for you. For all the wildlife of the earth, for every bird of the sky, and for every creature that crawls on the earth, everything having the breath of life in it, I've given every green plant for food. This is the whole passage. It is ownership, 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 dominion over the earth. I've given you the earth to rule over it and to subdue it, to multiply, fill it, subdue it, rule it, dominion. This is a part not just of what we want, because some people will say, people like owning things, they like to own their cars and like to own their houses. And it's just sociologically constructed, or it's just culturally convenient, or they just grew up believing that was the right way. But what if it's deeper? What if it's actually a part of the Imago Dei? What if it's actually a part of us being made in the image of our Creator? You see, part of why ownership matters and part of why God gave us unique ownership, and nobody says that our dogs own anything. They have a bed, they have a kennel, they have toys, they have food. They don't own it, right? The reason that ownership matters is because God has given us responsibility on the earth, and significant responsibility. Like he has actually put us here as his ambassadors to the world. We are the imagers of God on the earth. We're here for reconciliation and redemption. It's like the highest level of responsibility possible. And responsibility requires authority. It just does. In the corporate environment, any kind of work environment, if you want to set someone up to fail really quickly, give them a lot of responsibility and no authority. Make them responsible for a project, but don't give them the authority to buy the things that they need or to recruit the people that they need, or don't give them any access to the budgets to see how things function, and make sure you never return their calls. Give them all kinds of responsibility and no authority. That's the fastest way to set someone up to fail. I was put in charge of a team one time, and on this team, I wasn't allowed to hold anyone accountable. I wasn't allowed to fire anybody. I wasn't allowed to make any real changes. And so I had all the responsibility for the outcome and what we produced, but I didn't have any measures or leverage to get anything accomplished. I was completely set up to fail. This is what people like the World Economic Forum, billionaire elitists who are so disconnected from the everyday person that maybe they even genuinely think they're doing the right thing. Some people think the World Economic Forum is like this conspiratorial body. It's actually the lizard people who are running everything, and they just want to take us all captive and put us into some form of slavery.
Wow.
Now, maybe, but also maybe they're just super disconnected and they have no idea how the world actually works, and they haven't had to like live a real life in a very long time. And here's the other thing about any of these redistributionist type scenarios. It's not that everyone will own nothing and you're supposed to be happy. It's that we won't own anything. There will be a very small number of elite people who own all of it, and they will hand it down to us. And this is an inversion of the created order, because the understanding in that Genesis narrative is all of it's actually God's. But God has blessed us, and he's given us ownership so that we can steward well. Authority and responsibility. And then he wants to see what we'll do with it. And when you take all ownership away from people and a small number of elites own it all, they're placing themselves in the position of God. And when we as individuals take God out of the picture and we use our stuff only for our own gain, and we don't realize in humility that it all actually belongs to God, then we make ourselves God. And that's quite dangerous as well. There's a great parable that Jesus told in Matthew chapter 25. It's the parable of the talents. It goes like this: for it's just like a man about to go on a journey. He called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. And we're going to see what entrusted really means. To one, he gave 5 talents, and to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, depending on their ability. And then he went on a journey. And immediately, the man who had received 5 talents went, put them to work, and earned 5 more. And in the same way, the man with 2 earned 2 more. But the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. The parable continues that the king comes home, and he wants to give an account for what people did with what he gave them. And you'll notice they had responsibility for it. It was given to them. But they also were given authority. They were actually able to steward this. The servant who had 5 and the servant who had 2, they went out into the marketplace. They were on their grind. They did their work, and they doubled their investment. We're able to give it back to the king. This is how life works. God gives us our life. He gives us our giftings, our personality, our temperaments, our actual talents, like the things that we're good at. Talent was a measure of money in the Old Testament, but our actual talents, the way we think about them today, he gives us our relationships. He gives us everything. And then he wants to know what we're going to do with it. And one day we'll stand before him and see if we made a good investment of the life that he gave us. It's all his, but he gives us ownership, responsibility, but also authority. And you need both of those. God allows us ownership as a part of the Imago Dei, as a part of his imagers. Ownership does several things. It creates authority. Not only that, it incentivizes investment. Look, when you own a house, it's an investment. When you rent a house, ultimately you end up with nothing for what you're putting your money into. There's nothing long-term there. Ownership incentivizes care and upkeep of what you have. There's a massive difference. You know this. If you're going to buy a house, one of the things you want to know is the history of the house. And specifically, you want to know that the last 3 people who live there own it or rent it. Because there is something just intrinsically inside of you that knows if they owned it, they took much better care of it. You care for what you own. I had one friend, very interesting guy, He's the only person I've ever known who would rent houses and fix them up while he lived there. He'd paint the walls. He'd take out the carpet and put hardwood. He'd build a deck. He's an exception that proves the rule. He's just a weird cat. And he loves God and he wants to bless people in a unique way. It's an exception that proves the rule. And the general rule is people fix up the houses they own because it's an investment into who they are and what they have. You know, when I rent a car, I'm going to be honest with you. I drive it differently than the car that I own.
Wow.
Now, part of that is because if I drove my car fast, that is 14,000 years old, it would blow up. So I rent a car, you know, if every car in every city is a driverless Uber, then when people spill their crap on the floor, they're just going to leave it there. When people don't own any of their homes, they're not going to care for their homes. And we're going to have a least common denominator society. That's how it is going to work. What the Great Reset does is it creates responsibility without authority, a situation that is doomed to fail. And it takes the place of God and puts in that category a few disconnected, possibly spoiled billionaire elites. And if we think that the people at the global World Economic Forum can run our society and give us peace better than the actual God of the universe can, I happen to think that we are extremely, extremely misguided. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Clayton Tyner podcast. If you want to watch the full podcast, you can check that out somewhere right around here. And if you want to subscribe, you can do that right over here somewhere. Also, you can follow me at Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner on Twitter and Instagram. I would love for you to subscribe to the channel so you can keep up with everything that we're doing.